This is Sky News Today. It's 11 o'clock. The headlines. Household bills predicted to rise by up to £600 a year as the energy price cap is due to more than double. But some relief to households to be pledged by the Chancellor. He'll make an announcement in the Commons later this hour. Awash with cash as households struggle. Shell's profits are buoyed by rising wholesale gas prices. Markets predict an interest rate rise from the Bank of England to tackle rising inflation. We'll find out if they're right at noon.
I'm at a food bank talking to families hard hit by the cost of living and forced to choose between heating and eating.
It stays warm for about 10-15 minutes and then that's it. Even if we're under quilt and we have hot water bottle, it's still cold and we just sit there shaking and everything.
Also coming up this afternoon, Sky News understands Northern Ireland's First Minister is expected to resign amid the row over post-Brexit border checks.
Why would I betray you?
We all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet.
And hello, Mr. Bond. Daniel Craig's final outing as 007 is among the favourites as the BAFTA nominees are announced later today.
Good morning. Live from Stoke-on-Trent. Millions of people here and across the country are about to find out just how much their energy bills will rise from this April. Well, that's because the energy regulator, Ofgem, is to announce the new price cap. That's the maximum amount providers can charge dual-fuel customers. Well, the energy regulator is expected to announce a price cap rise of about 50%. That means bills of around £1,900 to £2,000 per year compared to the current figure that stands at around £1,200 a year. I think we can cross now to Paul Kelso, who can break the news for us now on that price hike. Paul, over to you.
Yes, the regulator Ofgem has announced that the new price cap for a standard use, average use of a dual fuel bill will rise to £1,971. That's up just almost exactly £700 from the current rate of £1,277, so a major increase, nudging 50%. As many analysts had predicted, it reflects the huge increase in wholesale gas prices that have driven up the costs for suppliers over the last 6 months, have caused more than 25 suppliers of energy to go bust, placing pressure right across the board, stripping out the cheaper options, the switching options for customers to seek cheaper bills. And they are now looking at, from April the 1st, the average dual fuel bill will be capped at £1,971. That is forecast to push at least another 2 million households into fuel stress or fuel poverty, and it will, of course, beg a response from the government. This is the kind of price increase to a necessary utility that no one can do without, that is going to affect not just the poorest in society, but median income households. Almost everyone is going to feel the scale of this in their pockets. Worth remembering that a year ago, the price cap was just over £1,000, so it has very nearly doubled in the space of a year. And if today's news wasn't enough for people to try and digest, the forecast is in that 6 months' time, given the state of the gas market and the expectation prices will remain high, it could be going up again to well north of £2,000. So we will hear in the next half hour or so the response from the floor of the House of Commons from the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We've talked about, we've had briefings and suggestions of various measures to take money off these bills, perhaps £200 rebated to every customer. But given the scale of this increase, the price cap now just shy of £2,000, even a £200 rebate is going to leave every household, at least certainly 22 million households who are on standard variable rates, are still going to be looking at a £500 increase, a £50 a month, getting on for £50 a month anyway, increase in their fuel bills. And with interest rates due to go up later today, inflation as it stands north of 5% and tax rises coming in April, there will be a great deal of attention on what the Chancellor announces he's going to do about this cost of living squeeze in about half an hour.
OK, Paul, for the moment, thank you. A lot of pain coming to a lot of people. And as Paul said there, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, will be taking to his feet in the Commons. That's to deliver his statement in response to that energy price cap at around 11:30 this morning. That's in just under half an hour's time. Do stay with us for all of that. And that price rise will affect many people here in Stoke-on-Trent. The price rise will affect many people here in Stoke-on-Trent, one of the 10 local authorities worst affected by fuel poverty. That means many households here are spending more than 10% of their income on energy bills. That's after paying their rent or their mortgage. Well, even before the pandemic, there were 3.2 million households in England living in fuel poverty. More than 25,000 households in Stoke-on-Trent, that's 21.8%, are fuel poor, meaning the city has the second highest rate of fuel poverty in the country. Stoke-on-Trent Food Bank provided food aid to 14,000 people in 2020. This year, 1,500 people received food aid who had never used a food bank before. And one charity says it's provided more aid in the first 2 months of 2021 than in the whole of 2018. And our business correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, joins me now from one of Stoke-on-Trent's food banks. Astonishing stats there, Helen Ann, that many people had simply never used them before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we've heard this morning, that lots of people coming to this food bank in Stoke-on-Trent have never used them before. They're not the sort of people who you would typically historically associate with needing to come to food banks. They are people who are working. They are people who are holding down multiple jobs. And simply the cost of living squeeze is just so high at the moment that they need to come to places like this in desperation. This is really a community centre, Gillian. People coming for a cup of tea sometimes to get some extra help with their food, but also, crucially, to get some advice. There's advice services, Money Matters, to help people try and manage their bills. Just to put this in some context, Gillian, it's estimated that that rise in energy bills we've just confirmed, just shy of £700 a year on top of what people are already paying, that could push as many as a quarter of UK households into fuel poverty. A quarter, just think of that. So it's a huge, huge problem for people, as at the same time the inflation is rising massively, the cost of food, the cost of fuel at the pumps, tax increases coming down the line. It is desperate, desperate times for a lot of people. I'm just going to walk you over this way because I want to introduce you to a gentleman who knows what this is like, who's been dealing with people on the front line and giving them advice, crucially, in terms of how they can better look after themselves. Sorry to interrupt. This is Colin Ayres, working for Money Matters here, helping people, giving them some advice. Colin, it's a really difficult time for families. We've just had it confirmed just how much fuel bills are going to go up. £700, just shy of. What's your response to that in terms of the people you're seeing here and the people you're helping?
I mean, that's worse than I was expecting. We were expecting about £500–600. You know, it makes me extremely angry that how can that be justifiable? Clearly, the energy market's broken. Clients that come in here are struggling for food. They're struggling to heat, and it used to be either heat or eat, and now they're not going to be able to do either. So, someone on universal credit, that potentially means a bill for them going up by about 50% of what they get coming in. Someone who's on minimum wage, that's at least 10% of their income. That's a lot more than I was expecting.
And you said you've really seen a change in the type of people coming here to seek your advice in terms of how they're managing their bills.
Yeah, so since I've been doing this for over 18 months, I think we've seen about a 50% increase in clients that need our help, which is giving money advice, benefit advice, debt advice and energy advice. And there's a difference happening. So there are people who are in poverty who are on benefits or are not claiming benefit, but there are working everyday people who are now struggling. We're going to see more. We've been running this service since 2009, and things have been getting worse and worse and worse, and quite clearly something's very broken right now. And the energy industry is very broken. I worked there for 19 years, and I've never seen anything like this.
And put it into some context. If people's bills are just shy of £2,000 a year, going up by just shy of £700 on average, what does that mean in practical terms for the people who you're talking to every day?
Well, you think about that's easily 60, 70 quid a month for some people. Well, if you literally might not be able to eat as a result of that, or you might put yourself into debt, you might not know how to cope. I'm worried about it, and I'm working, and I'm sure you are as well. But for somebody, that is could be 50% of their income in some way. So where are they going to go? There are support services there, but there are not enough support services there. We struggle to take everyone on board that we would need to do. Places like the CAB struggle as well. So I'm concerned about who's going to fall through the cracks. We can help so many people, but it's a finite service. Where are they going to go? And people who don't have a voice, who don't even come here, what's going to happen to them? Do they end up going homeless because they get behind on the bills, because they start not paying their rent instead of paying their energy, because nobody wants to be cold and everyone needs to be able to heat the food? That's what concerns me.
And there is speculation, it looks likely that the government might sort of introduce a loan scheme of sorts to the energy companies, which would mean a rebate of about £200 per household. Is that going to make enough of a difference?
700 quid going up, £200, that's still 500 quid that someone's got to find, 30, 40 quid a month. You know, where it's not fixing the problem. The energy industry is broken, has been broken for some time, but particularly this last couple of years, we've never seen rises like this. Throwing 200 quid at it ain't the problem. There's something broken at the core. And that's what they need to fix. And they've known this has been coming for a bit. The price cap went up last year. Now it's going up by about 50, 60% compared to where it was. I don't know how people are going to cope.
I mean, we've been talking a bit this morning, Colin, and you sound quite angry about the situation.
I'm generally shocked that it's even worse than we thought. So what's that going to be now? It's going to be like £2,000 a year, isn't it, rather than 1,900. I think we all thought it might be slightly less, and we were all probably being a little bit over the top. It's too much. How can people cope with that? It's, you know, most people are going to struggle with where's the 60, 70 quid a month going to come from, and what's going to have to go as a result of it. Do they turn their energy down to a level where it's going to make them ill? If you drop it below, 18 to 21, below 18, you start getting cold-related illnesses. Some people are going to have to feel like they have to do that. And that's just ordinary working people. It's not enough to just have an energy efficiency advice. The energy market's broken. It needs fixing.
And you're very, very worried about the coming months and years then in terms of the people you're helping?
Yeah, well, this will come in 1st of April. We've seen a rise in clients as it is, more than we can cope with. Come 1st of April when this kicks in, it'll take a couple of months before it starts to bleed through. But think about this, that 600-700 is going to affect your shopping bill, because all of these companies have got to absorb this, so everything is going to go up as the result of it. It's not just the energy bill alone, it's everything. It'll be how you shop, it'll be where you go. So there's going to be a massive, massive shift in people's ability to be able to spend anything right now, on top of COVID.
Colin, thank you so much for your time.
No worries, thank you.
Really appreciate it. To put it in some context again, Gillian, there were roughly around 2 million households prior to this rise that are spending in excess of 10% of their disposable income on their energy bills. That's expected to triple to around 6 million households. So although the people who might be needing to come to a place like this are experiencing really very desperate situations, this is going to affect millions and millions and millions of people who are struggling greatly at the moment with the cost of living.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely certainty there that it will affect millions of people. So while people face the prospect of steep rises in their energy bills, the oil and gas company Shell has announced a profit of $17 billion for 2021. Despite soaring wholesale gas and oil prices, the company had fourth quarter profits of $6.4 billion. It's their best quarter since 2014 and has led to renewed calls for a windfall tax on North Sea energy firms in order to support consumers. Let's cross live now to our climate change correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter. And Hannah, many clamouring to say that these profits simply need to be passed on.
Yes, the energy business is a volatile one. Of course, Shell, amongst the many big operators that reported huge losses in 2020 because of the reducing demand during COVID, now reporting huge record-breaking profits because of the spiking price of energy. That spiking price, of course, brings so much pain to millions of families in the UK. And this is all prompting renewed calls from the Labour Party and others for a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies operating in the North Sea to help alleviate the pain for consumers. Now, Shell had an earnings call. Its CEO, Ben van Beurden, was questioned very closely on the issue of a windfall tax, and this is what he said.
It is a concerning picture, and we completely understand that. But what I said also in response to a previous question, of course, this is driven very much by a global dynamic, which as a small player like we are, with sort of 1.5% of energy supplies, there's only so much that of course can be done by a company like us. I am not convinced that windfall taxes, popular though they may seem, is going to help us with supply, nor is it going to help us with demand.
Shell's results, and of course results of other energy companies, which are expected to be similarly good from a business point of view, have given new momentum to a couple of interesting debates that we've been tracking at Sky News. The first is the broader tax environment in the United Kingdom, which is widely considered to be a very good place to do business if you are a fossil fuel operator. We have reported on Sky News before that Shell is amongst many companies operating in the North Sea that actually paid negative tax last year. And there are broader questions about whether or not that should be sustainable, given that the UK is trying to be a climate leader. The government might argue that it's the right thing to make this a stable and advantageous tax environment for fossil fuel companies so that they can be kept in place in order to invest in the transition to renewable energy. And the second is more of a political row, really, a growing row within the Conservative Party, that there are those now saying in order to increase energy security in the United Kingdom and potentially even bring down prices for consumers, there should be more drilling for gas in the North Sea. And there are others within the same party saying that is not the answer. We have to make the transition to renewables faster. So plenty of scrutiny for many reasons on those Shell's results today.
Hannah, thank you. Well, you can follow all the energy price cap developments on our website by scanning the QR code on screen now. You can follow today's stories and read the live updates on the Sky News live blog. Well, let's bring you some breaking news now about the Wraith Rovers footballer David Goodwill. Our Scotland correspondent James Matthews can bring us up to date on that. James, what can you tell us?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. I can tell you there has been a reversal of this most controversial signing. David Goodwill was signed by Wraith Rovers, who play here at Starks Park in Kirkcaldy. Earlier in the week, it prompted an outcry because he is a rapist. He is adjudged, or was adjudged by a civil court in 2007 to have raped a woman. Latterly, he's been playing for Clyde Football Club. Previously, he played for Blackburn Rovers and Dundee United. But he was playing for Clyde, signed by Wraith Rovers, and that prompted an outcry with prominent supporters, including the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, very critical. So too, Val McDermott, the famous crime writer, big fan, steeped in Wraith Rovers history. Her father was the scout who spotted the great Jim Baxter. She has been a shirt sponsor. That stand is named the Val McDermott stand. She became a board member. She cut ties and effectively led a very fast-growing campaign against this signing. The captain of the women's team left Wraith Rovers' women's side. So there was a huge amount of protest, joined by Nicola Sturgeon as well. She was critical of Scotland's First Minister. Sponsors were withdrawing their funding. Board directors stepped down. So there was huge pressure on this club in Kirkcaldy. And this morning, in a statement on the club website, they have announced that he won't be selected for the club, and they are in discussions with him about his contract. So he's clearly on his way out. I'll read you some of the that club's statement. It is a fulsome apology. They say they want to apologise. This is the chairman. I firstly want to apologise wholeheartedly to our fans, sponsors, players, and the wider Wraith Rovers community for the anguish and anger caused over the past few days. We got it wrong, he says. In reaching our original decision, we focused far too much on football matters and not enough on what the decision would mean for our club and the community as a whole. Over the past few days, we listened carefully to the fans who got in touch. And I'm very grateful for their honesty. As chairman, as a board and as a management team, this statement says, we have all learned a hard, but valuable lesson. The statement calls it a very unfortunate episode, bitterly regretted by the club, who say they are now wholly committed to making things right. And the statement says, I can therefore confirm that following a meeting of the Raith Rovers board, the player will not be selected by Raith Rovers, and we will enter into discussions with the player regarding his contractual position. We share a desire to do what's best for our club, and we'll be doing everything in our power to regain the trust and confidence of the Raith Rovers family. Julian, I can tell you, just looking at my Twitter timeline, it's clear that that road to recovery may be a long one. Many people saying, well, look, that's fine, but this, the signing of a rapist, should never have happened in the first place. It may be a long road to recovery, but they have taken a step on that road within the past half hour.
James, thank you. We're back to the cost of living news today, and the Bank of England is expected to announce a rise in the interest rate in an attempt to stem the flow of rising inflation. It's already increased to 0.25% this year. It's now widely forecast to go up again to 0.5%, with many expecting yet more increases later in 2022. And we'll bring you that decision as it happens right here on Sky News at 12 p.m. midday, with all the reaction from our economics editor, Ed Conway, ahead of hearing the Bank of England governor himself a little later. That'll be at around 12:30. But joining me now is Jason Powner is joining me now. He owns the Skin Jace Tattoo Studio here in Stoke-on-Trent. Welcome to you. Found out a fun fact this morning. Neil Morrissey got tattooed, inked right here in Stoke-on-Trent.
Yeah, he didn't.
Did you know that?
Tattoo studio.
Now, we really want to find out how your business is going to be affected by these increases. I mean, how's it been? Let's talk about the period of the pandemic so far. How has business been like?
Business has been okay for me personally. As regards to the food bank, it's always been a problem within the Stoke-on-Trent area. Prior to the pandemic, we were always kind of busy with that. I can only presume with what's going on with the short, with the power cut, with the power. I can only see it being a bigger problem than it actually is now, with the dishing out of the food banks. Now, there is plenty of people around Stoke-on-Trent, small local businesses like myself, that do go out there and we help the local people of Stoke-on-Trent. But we need a lot more local businesses to join in with us. We have local football clubs, Port Vale Foundation, they do a lot for the local community. There's lots and lots of people within the area, but obviously with what's going on with the energy prices, the increase, I can only see the problem being a lot more,
Yeah, more than 50% increase, 1,971 a year. That's an awful lot of money for people to find that are struggling right now.
Yeah. Again, myself and my business, I can only, like everybody else, I mean, we're going to have to, put up with the increase in prices. But I don't know. With the people that are struggling now, the elderly, the vulnerable, I can just see it just getting a lot worse than it actually is, right now.
What will it mean for you in terms of your business? Because you're saying that potentially you're going to have to increase the cost, pass that on to customers.
Yeah, I mean, I've always tried to keep my prices as low as I possibly can, same as every other business within Stoke-on-Trent, to try and curb whatever increases we get. But I'm on the side of the food bank at this present moment. I'm trying to see how it's going to affect us in supplying food to even more families that are going to be struggling. I don't know how it's going to pan out.
How does it work at the moment with the food that you get in? Are you entirely relying on donations with the work that you do with food banks?
Yeah, I'm an independent food bank, so basically I rely on the people that are on my social media. And within 24 hours of me asking for any kind of help, the help's usually there. On a daily basis, we go out and we supply food to struggling families, vulnerable families, elderly. Even through the pandemic, we were going to care homes and doing isolation packs. But again, with the increase in energy, 50% I hear it may be increase. So I don't know how them people are going to cope with that rise.
Yeah, an already difficult situation about to be made much more difficult.
Yes.
Jason, thank you very much for speaking to us, and thank you for the work that you do for those who are more vulnerable. Thank you. Well, so a very busy few hours ahead today. Let's just take a quick look at exactly what is happening and when. At 11:30, we'll bring you that statement from the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, as he addresses the Commons. Then at midday, 12 o'clock, all eyes on the Bank of England as it gives its interest rate decision. And at 12:30, we'll hear live from the bank's governor as he addresses the details behind any move. This is Sky News Today. Coming up, Kimberly will bring you up to date with all the rest of the day's news from the Sky News Centre.
First and foremost, I think it's the comfort factor, you know, and let's face it, the world around us is slightly messy at the moment. I think we can just find a little oasis in a really simple, joyful word game. Its rules are very simple. We are set the same challenge as everybody right across the world every day. And there's only one, we're rationed to one. So I think it's teaching us a level of patience that, you know, hasn't been required of us really for years, because there are so many apps out there, obviously, that offer endless plays of things. So I think it's really special from that point of view. I know people assume that I'm going to be a real strategist about this, and there are a lot of people who try and work out algorithms and things. But to be honest, I just dive straight in. There's probably a little bit of kind of, I don't know, bargaining, I suppose, on my part, in that I will go with one of the most frequently used letters, E, always, because that's at the top of the list. I often start with noise, because that includes some of the most frequently used letters as well. So you can, if you like, approach it from that point of view. But for me, the real pleasure is in the process of elimination and that code breaking exercise that comes after. So, you know, there's no time pressure as well. You can ponder it all day if you like, as long as you obey the golden rule and do not put any spoilers on Twitter or social media, because that can genuinely ruin someone's day. You know, I think none of us could begrudge Josh Wardle for wanting a reward from this. And also, I think from his statement, and from everything he said so far, you know, it seems like it was almost becoming too much for him. It's not something he expected. And to be fair, the New York Times also has real pedigree when it comes to word games. Obviously, it has its crossword as well, which is very famous. So, you know, hopefully, they say that it will initially be free. Hopefully that initial period will, you know, will be a long one, and we can all keep enjoying it, you know, as much as we do.
In Afghanistan, women and children are being hit hardest by a devastating and growing humanitarian crisis. 6 months on from the Taliban takeover, the withdrawal of international aid means that banks are paralysed and teachers and medical staff are going largely unpaid. Now, the Red Cross is warning that hospitals are struggling to cope and many essential services are near collapse. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, reports now from Kalainau in Baghis province, and her report contains some very distressing pictures of a dead child and babies fighting for their lives.
The women of Baghis queue for hours for free paracetamol for the sick. In Afghanistan's most deprived province, nothing comes easy and everything's scarce. They're cramming babies onto beds in the province's main hospital. In some wards, it's standing room only. A measles outbreak is ripping through them. In the tiny, who have already poor immunity, measles can be a death sentence. The insecurities meant vaccines haven't been given. And there are claims it's the Taliban who prevented them. The Talib, now in charge of health services here, left school at 14. Not long ago, he was fighting foreign troops, and he blames others for the current mess. The previous president was the most corrupt person in the most corrupt government in the world, he tells us, and we have a lack of everything. That means those least able are losing this fight. Arezo's parents travelled hours to get help here at the main hospital, but their little daughter died bitingly cold and aching with hunger. We're living in tents, her father says. There's no warm place, and that's why she died. We just couldn't keep her warm. There's no time for grief. They've 2 more children to keep alive. There are too many like Arezo who've perished, starving and cold. It never gets any easier. She's already lost 2 other children. Now Rizima's youngest is only just clinging to life. Kadia has a range of complications normally treated easily, and at the root of them all is poverty and malnutrition. Later the same night after filming this, Kadia also succumbed. Afghanistan's babies are dying at a shockingly high rate. There's no pain relief for 16-year-old Samaya. There are few medicines here, which partly explains why the country has one of the highest maternal and child mortality rates. It's been a difficult and traumatic delivery, and the baby is completely limp and unresponsive. Bring a towel, quickly, the doctor's calling. I'm really scared, the exhausted new mother says. She's worried for herself and her newborn son.
I'm sorry, we're going to break into that report because we're going to the Commons now, where we are going to hear from the Chancellor. There he is. Let's have a listen.
2021, a full year earlier. Unemployment was expected to peak at nearly 12%. Instead, it peaked at 5.2% and has now fallen to just over 4%, saving more than 2 million jobs. And with the fastest growing economy in the G7 this year, over 400,000 more people on payrolls than before the pandemic, and business investment rising, it is no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that borrowing is set to fall from £320 billion last year, the highest ever peacetime level, to just £46 billion by the end of this Parliament. As we emerge from the depths of the worst recession in 300 years, we should be proud of our economic record. The economy is stronger because of the plan we put in place, because of the actions we took to protect families and businesses, and that plan is working. But for all the progress we are making, the job is not yet done. Right now, I know that the #1 issue on people's minds is the rising cost of living. It is the Independent Bank of England's role to deliver low and stable inflation. And the Governor will set out their judgments at midday today. And just as the government stood behind the British people through the pandemic, so we will help people deal with one of the biggest costs they now face, energy. The energy regulator, Ofgem, announced this morning that the energy price cap will rise in April to £1,971, an increase of £693 for the average household. Without government action, this would be incredibly tough for millions of hard-working families. So the government is going to step in to directly help people manage those extra costs. Mr. Speaker, before I set out the steps we are taking, let me explain what is happening to energy prices and why. People's energy bills are rising because it is more expensive for companies who supply our energy to buy oil, coal and gas. Of the £693 increase in the April price cap, around 80% comes from wholesale energy prices. Over the last year, the price of gas alone has quadrupled. And because over 85% of homes in Britain are heated with a gas boiler, and around 40% of our electricity comes from gas, this is hitting households hard. Now, the reason gas prices are soaring are global. Across Europe and Asia, a long cold winter last year depleted gas stores. Disruption to other energy sources like nuclear and wind left us relying more than usual on gas during the summer months. Surging demand in the world's manufacturing centres in Asia at the same time as countries like China are moving away from coal, is further increasing demand for gas. And concerns about a possible Russian incursion into Ukraine are putting further pressure on wholesale gas markets. And so prices are rising. Mr. Speaker, the price cap has meant that the impact of soaring gas prices has so far fallen predominantly on energy companies, so much so that some suppliers who couldn't afford to meet those extra costs have gone out of business as a result. It is not sustainable to keep holding the price of energy artificially low. For me to stand here and pretend we don't have to adjust to paying higher prices would be wrong and dishonest. But what we can do is take the sting out of a significant price shock for millions of families by making sure the increase in prices is smaller initially and spread over a longer period. Mr. Speaker, without government intervention, the increase in the price cap would leave the average household having to find an extra £693. The actions I'm announcing today will provide to the vast majority of households just over half of that amount, £350. In total, the government is going to help around 28 million households this year. Taken together, this is a plan to help with the cost of living worth around £9 billion. We are delivering that support in 3 different ways. First, we will spread the worst of the extra costs of this year's energy price shock over time. This year, all domestic electricity customers will receive an upfront discount on their bills worth £200. Energy suppliers will apply the discount on people's bills from October, with the government meeting the cost in full. That discount will automatically be repaid from people's bills in equal £40 instalments over the next 5 years. This is the right way to support people while staying on track with our plans to repair the public finances. And because we are taking a fiscally responsible approach, we can also provide more help faster to those who need it most, the second part of our plan. We're going to give people a £150 council tax rebate to help with the cost of energy in April, and this discount won't need to be repaid. And I do want to be clear with the House that we are deliberately not just giving support to people on benefits. Lots of people on middle incomes are struggling right now too. So we have decided to provide the council tax rebate to households in bands A to D. This means around 80% of all homes in England will benefit. And the third part of our plan will provide local authorities with a discretionary fund of nearly £150 million to help those lower income households who happen to live in higher council tax properties and households in bands A to D who are exempt from council tax at all. We're also confirming today that we'll go ahead with existing plans to expand eligibility for the Warm Homes discount by almost a third, so that 3 million vulnerable households will now benefit from that scheme. And that's not all we're doing to help vulnerable households. We're providing £3 billion over this Parliament to help more than 500,000 lower-income homes become more energy efficient, saving them, on average, £290 a year. Increasing the national living wage to £9.50 an hour in April, a rise of over £1,000 for 2 million low-paid workers. And we're providing an effective tax cut for those on universal credit, allowing almost 2 million households to keep an average of £1,000 per year. The payment through energy suppliers will apply across England, Wales and Scotland. Energy policy is devolved in Northern Ireland with a different regulator, and the government does not have the legal powers to intervene. But we will make sure the executive is funded to do something similar, with around £150 million for Northern Ireland through the Barnett formula next year. And because the council tax system is England only, total Barnett consequentials of around £565 million will be provided to the devolved administrations in the usual way. Mr. Speaker, I know that some in this House have argued for a VAT cut on energy. However, that policy would disproportionately benefit wealthier households. There would be no guarantee that suppliers would pass on the discounts to all customers, and we should be honest with ourselves. This would become a permanent government subsidy on everyone's bills. A permanent subsidy worth £2.5 billion every year at a time when we are trying to rebuild the public finances. Instead, our plan allows us to provide more generous support faster to those who need it most, providing 28 million households with at least £200 and the vast majority receiving £350. It is fair, it is targeted, it is proportionate. It is the right way to help people with a spike in energy costs. Mr. Speaker, today's announcements are just one part of the government's plan to tackle this country's most pressing economic challenges. A plan for growth with record investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills. A plan to restore the public finances with debt falling by the end of this Parliament. A plan to cut waiting lists and back the NHS with £29 billion over 3 years and a permanent new source of funding. And with the measures I've announced today, a plan to help with the rising cost of energy, with £350 more in the pockets of tens of millions of hard-working families. That's our plan to build a stronger economy, not just today, but for the long term, and I commend it to this House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement? We have known that this price rise was coming for months, and today we learn that the energy price cap will increase to £1,971 in April. In October, I called on the government to provide immediate support for households, cutting VAT on their energy bills and saving £200 off bills, with £400 in extra targeted support for those who need it most, which would mean for some of the poorest families in our country, almost no increase in energy bills from April. The government have not done that today. Now, we all remember when the Prime Minister said that cutting VAT was one of the benefits of Brexit. He said, and I quote, "When we vote leave, we'll be able to scrap this unfair and damaging tax." Could there ever be a time where this policy is more needed than it is today? And I would have thought that the Prime Minister, with his unblemished record of integrity, would defend the commitments that he has made. But instead, it's another pledge thrown onto the bonfire of broken Tory promises. And the uncomfortable truth for the Chancellor is that even after what he has announced today, families in Britain will be still paying hundreds of pounds more for their energy, including some of the poorest families, from April as a result of the breathtaking rise in energy prices just announced by Ofgem. Millions of people cutting back to pay the bills. Citizens' Advice have said that they have seen a record number of people in January struggling with fuel debts before the energy price increase. But what does the government offer? A buy now, pay later scheme that loads up costs for tomorrow. High prices as far as the eye can see. This year, next year and the year after that. Give with one hand now and take it all back later. The party opposite used to talk about the nation's credit card. Well, today, Mr. Speaker, we've seen the Chancellor force British households to load up their credit cards. By lending billions of pounds to energy companies, the Chancellor is gambling that prices are going to fall. But they could go up further in October. What then? Billions more loaded onto people's bills? The best way of targeting support to those who need it most would be an increase to £400 and an extension to 9 million households of the Warm Homes discount, as Labour have proposed. Their scheme today is a pale imitation of Labour's, especially for the households and pensioners on the most modest incomes. The Chancellor instead is using council tax to target extra help. That will mean many of the poorest households will not get extra support, while some of the richest do. And it's people living in the North and the Midlands who will lose out most. The hypocrisy the day after the government's levelling up white paper is obvious.
Order. Mr. Holden. think we need to be a little calmer. I'm sure you'll want to catch my eye, and it's not the way to do so. Chancellor Rachel Reid.
So can the Chancellor confirm how many people who are fuel poor will miss out on council tax support compared to the warm homes discount support that Labour have announced? Mr Speaker, the government had a choice. Only today, Shell announced that their profits had quadrupled to $20 billion. They described their results as momentous. Dividends up, profits up, and people's energy bills up too. Labour's plan would impose a one-off windfall tax on those excess profits. But this Chancellor would rather shield the oil and gas producers, while at the same time loading the cost onto working people and pensioners. Cabinet ministers have described the oil and gas producers as struggling. Struggling, Mr Speaker. Tell that to the 1 in 5 people who are already skipping meals so that they can pay their energy bills. And Mr Speaker, this energy crisis has not happened overnight. It's a decade of dither and delay from the party opposite that has brought us to this point. A decade of failure to regulate our energy market. A decade in which they have slashed our gas storage capacity, leaving us more reliant than ever on Russia for our gas imports. A decade of failure to make the most of solar, tidal and wind energy. And a decade of stalled progress on insulating our homes to keep bills low, not just for 1 year, but into the future too. It has been the Tory decade that has led to this announcement, Mr Speaker, of the biggest increase in the price of domestic energy since records began. That is what the Chancellor should acknowledge and should apologise for today. The Conservatives aren't solving the cost of living crisis because the Conservative Party are the cost of living crisis.
Mr Speaker, the opposition may have some sound bites, but they certainly don't have a policy. In contrast, this government has announced measures.
Mr Seeley, is there something wrong with that wood you keep knocking? Because I think it's in good order. You don't need to test for woodworm. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
In contrast, Mr Speaker, this government has announced measures to share the burden with consumers and help manage the global price rise. And despite the faux outrage from the benches opposite, I'm sure that even they would admit privately, Mr Speaker, the support just announced is both generous and comprehensive. Let me take some of the honourable lady's points in turn, Mr Speaker. Well, first of all, on the topic of VAT, can I say, Mr Speaker, how very welcome it is that the opposition are recognising the benefits of Brexit. I hope they will join me in celebrating the fact that we have been able to change mass migration to this country after decades, that we can create new free ports in places like Teesside, that we can sign new free trade deals, and we can deregulate our economy to drive faster growth. She talked about VAT, Mr Speaker. VAT on average would be worth £90 to every household. What we are doing is providing £150 to those households who really need it and delivering that support quicker, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the honourable lady also tried to claim that it was the government's responsibility to manage global gas prices. It is very clear, and any person sensibly looking at this will acknowledge, that what is causing the increase in gas prices are global factors, as I outlined in my statement. No British government, no British Chancellor can change what is happening in Asia, or indeed can stop a nuclear power plant from going offline in Germany. And she should acknowledge that. Even in places like Norway, electricity bills are rising because these are global factors at play, which she would do well to acknowledge. And I know the right honourable gentleman sitting next to her will know that, having spent a lot of time on this. Thirdly, Mr Speaker, I do want to address this point about our support for the most vulnerable, because I am proud of this government's record in supporting those who need our help. The policies that we have announced today are progressive in their nature. A flat rate will, of course, mean far more to those on lower incomes incomes or with lower energy bills. It is worth 5 times as much as a percentage of income for those in the lowest incomes as those on the highest incomes. And she talked about insulation. We are spending over this Parliament £3 billion to improve the energy efficiency and insulation of over 500,000 households in fuel poverty, Mr. Speaker. That is the right thing to do, and it will save those vulnerable families, on average, £300 a year. Not just this year, but every year going forward. And we have already announced those plans, Mr. Speaker. And lastly, to address her point on windfall taxes, and of course, they sound superficially appealing, Mr. Speaker, but we on this side of the House deal with complex problems in a responsible way. Now, the obvious impact of a windfall tax would be, Mr. Speaker, to deter investment. It's as simple as that. And at this moment, I want to see more investment in the North Sea, not less. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we saw the lowest amount of investment on record in the North Sea, as my honourable friend pointed out just the other day. And there are billions of pounds, £11 billion of projects lined up to go. I want to unlock that investment because that is good for this country. It is good for British jobs, Mr. Speaker, and it is good for our energy security. So, Mr. Speaker, we will pursue policies that are good for the interests of this country, not just today, but in the future. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is working very hard to make sure that we have an energy market that is fit for the future. We have made investments in nuclear, which, as he rightly pointed out, investments in nuclear that were ignored by the party opposite when they were in power, that we are now fixing. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I am not blind to the challenges that we face. I have to say, though, to the right honourable member opposite and her colleagues, we on this side of the House did not have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines and throwing stones. Faced with the gravest of crises, this government chose to protect millions of jobs. It chose to support millions of businesses. It chose to invest in a world-leading vaccination programme. And it chose a balanced approach to COVID so we could open up faster than anywhere else in Europe, Mr. Speaker. We did these things at record speed at a time of great uncertainty. And we will always strive to learn from mistakes. Nothing is ever perfect when responding to a crisis. But I'd say to the party opposite, there is a fine line between reasonable criticism and political opportunism. And in my experience, Mr. Speaker, the British people can always tell the difference.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's announcement today? Will he agree that a cut in VAT to solve this crisis is a completely flawed policy?
Absolutely.
As evidenced by the 3 economists who spoke to the Treasury Select Committee this week, including Torsten Bell from the Resolution Foundation, who wanted something far more targeted, such as my right honourable friend has announced today. It is clear one factor in this crisis is Russia's willingness to weaponise its gas supplies. Will he confirm, if there is any incursion into the Ukraine, that this country and other international countries will look at weaponising our banking system, which would be economically catastrophic for Russia should they do that?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. On the point of VAT, I have nothing further to add, and he is right that what we are doing is more targeted, it is faster, and it is more generous to those who need our help. And I can assure him that with regard to sanctions on Russia, absolutely nothing is off the table, and we are working very closely with our international partners, as the Foreign Secretary has outlined, to prepare a very robust package of sanctions.
SNP spokesperson Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor brags about having the fastest recovery, but that's actually wrong because Italy, for a start, has got a higher growth rate. But if the economy is doing so well, why is he still introducing a £12 billion tax on workers this financial year? Why is it taking to the last minute to try and do something about the cost of living crisis? And then why is so much of this actually a loan that bill payers are going to pay back? He talks about not doing a VAT cut because he wants a more targeted approach. So how is giving everybody a rebate a targeted approach? It's illogical. Now, Mr. Speaker, the reality is the Treasury is currently raking it in compared to where they thought they'd be in the March 2021 budget. an extra £3 billion this financial year next year from oil and gas revenues. VAT receipt predictions in October last year was nearly £40 billion higher than what they were for March 2021. So that's a lot of money the Treasury could be freeing up. Meanwhile, average energy bills increased this year to nearly £1,200, up from £700 the year before, bringing in an extra £0.6 billion in VAT. The VAT increase due to the cap rise is going to bring the Treasury another £0.8 billion a year. So there's so much more money they could free up. Now, the Scottish Government's bringing in the £20 per week child payment and then uprating the child winter assistance payment. So could the Chancellor not look at doing something similar? Will he confirm that the council tax rebate proposal he's bringing in will have Barnett consequentials, how much that will be, and that will go to the Scottish Government? Will he look at devolving further budgets and powers so that Scotland can do a more targeted approach? Now, National Energy Action estimated that the increase in the cap would put 6 million people into fuel poverty. So with his measures, what impact assessment has government made and how many households will be in fuel poverty? How many more premature deaths will there be because people are in fuel poverty? And lastly, Mr Speaker, in the Highlands of Scotland, the Highlands generate electricity and send it to the rest of the UK, but yet electricity users in the Highlands and the restricted meters pay 4 pence a unit more for electricity, £400 more on their bills. When will the Treasury and Bees work with Ofgem to remove that ridiculous surcharge for these people in the Highlands?
Mr Speaker, I'm happy. Mr Speaker, I'm happy to confirm to the honourable gentleman that the Barnett consequentials for Scotland will be around £290 million, which I hope that he will welcome. And my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will be speaking to Kate Forbes later today to go over the details. And I very much hope that the Scottish Government will choose to do something very similar to what we are doing to the benefit of Scottish citizens. Of course, Scottish citizens will benefit from the rebate scheme on bills because that is a GB-wide policy, as I outlined. And with regard to his broader points on the North Sea, I said that there is a clear point of difference, I think, between us on this side of the House and the SNP, because we believe in the future of the North Sea. We believe in the oil and gas industry. We believe in those 200,000 jobs that it supports, and we want to make sure it plays an important part of our transition to net zero, Mr Speaker. And I hope that he can see that is the right thing for Scotland and will join us in supporting that very important industry.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent statement. Particularly its thoughtful and progressive nature of the actions that he plans to take. Does he agree with me that it is right to help not only the poorest, but also those on middle incomes who are struggling with their household budgets?
Absolutely. No, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know this is something that she has pressed me on behalf of her constituents. A price increase of this magnitude impacts almost everybody, Mr Speaker, and it is right that our response therefore helps almost everybody. That's what we are doing, making sure that those families that are working hard on household incomes of 40,000 or so will still get the £150 worth of support. 4 out of every household will benefit. We are on the side of hard-working families like that, Mr Speaker, and I make no apology for it.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. I see we now have the Klarna Chancellor, the pay now, buy now, get it now and pay later. But there is a really important issue about council tax. When areas like mine and parts of London, there are not many people in bands, certainly bands A to C. But who is going to fund the council tax rebate? Will that be fully funded by the Exchequer, and will there be a weighting of the £150 million fund to the areas like mine where I've got poor households in high-value properties?
Mr Speaker, just to confirm for the honourable lady, it's council tax bands A to D, so it is 4 out of every 5 households across England. Obviously, that will vary by region. I can confirm to her that will be fully Exchequer funded, and on top of that, there will be a discretionary fund of around £150 million, which the Department for Local Government will decide the best allocation formula for, and that will be able to be used by local authorities to help those low-income households who happen to live in higher council tax band properties, and indeed those people, students, for example, that are exempt from paying council tax at all, but we would want to get the support to them.
Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives believe in holding taxes down and putting more money in their people's pockets and so they can decide how to spend it. Socialists believe in raising taxes and then choosing to give it back in the form of discounts and rebates to selected people the government think need it. Could the Chancellor tell me his approach in increasing national insurance contributions and then handing money back to different people through rebates and discounts, is that a Conservative approach or a socialist approach?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect for my honourable friend, I also believe that it is a Conservative approach to be responsible with this nation's public finances. I believe after recovering from the worst economic shock in 300 years, where borrowing spiralled to levels that we have not seen since World War II, that it is right and responsible to tackle that and get our borrowing and debt down to sustainable levels, which is why I've had to make difficult decisions, but also to fund the country's #1 priority, the NHS, and an unacceptably high growing number of people waiting for operations. That's what that funding will do. It's right that we provide a secure, long-term, sustainable funding stream for the country's #1 priority, and they should be reassured that every penny of that levy is going to go to the thing that they care most about.
Stephen Tibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's an obvious unfairness in the massive profits being made by the oil and gas companies at a time when families are facing such great hardship. Surely the Chancellor must make an intervention to address that. And he's announced a discretionary fund for local councils. Worried families will have no idea how much that will benefit them, if at all. Will he instead introduce an uplift in universal credit, having cut universal credit so unfairly just 4 months ago?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, it's worth pointing out that the energy companies that he talks about already are subject to a far higher rate of corporation tax. In fact, double the rate of corporation tax that other companies pay, 40% versus currently 19%. And I won't repeat my arguments about the windfall tax that I made earlier. And no, Mr. Speaker, we believe the right way is to make sure that people can keep more of what they earn, which is why we cut the universal credit taper rate by 8 percentage points. That's a £2.2 billion tax cut. It will benefit 2 million of the lowest paid people in our society. It's making work pay. It's strengthening incentives to work. It's the right policy. It's a Conservative policy.
Here, Esther McVeigh.
Mr. Speaker, many families across the country will struggle with their energy bills this year. So I am grateful that we have a Chancellor who's in touch with that. Will he commit to continue to ensure those in Middle Britain are supported by this government, as well as those on the very lowest of incomes?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I can give her that reassurance, and hopefully today's announcements will provide her with the confidence she needs that both I and this government are committed to being on the side of those hard-working families, which I know she does an enormous amount to represent and champion in this House.
Lawrence Shalami.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor mentioned that energy suppliers will apply the discount on people's bills from October. I'm contacted by Vauxhall constituents on an almost daily basis. Residents living in properties that are too cold to heat. Residents pleading with me to help them get those repairs done. Current data suggests that over 8,000 households in Vauxhall are already living in fuel poverty now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So what does the Chancellor have to say to my constituents who are already unable to make ends meet now and who are facing a hike of over £700 in their energy bills?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I can tell them is they won't have to wait until October, as the party opposite's proposals would have had them do. They will receive £150 in April, Mr. Speaker. And then in October, they will receive the rebate on their bills at a time when the energy price cap will also be looked at again. So it will be appropriate that there is further action to support then. But this is why this policy is the right policy. By using the council tax system, we can get money to people faster, Mr. Deputy Speaker. £150 in April for her constituents.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this smart set of measures, because we must retain fiscal discipline, because otherwise the problem will get worse rather than better. But could I also ask a question about monetary policy, which the Chancellor mentioned? He mentioned the independence of the Bank of England decision, which has just been announced. But there's some chatter about working in tandem with the bank. So can he confirm that in monetary policy, not just in interest rate setting, but with the withdrawal of QE, that bank independence will be respected?
Chancellor. I can give my right honourable friend that assurance. It is absolutely right and proper that the bank is independent of government on matters of monetary policy. That is exactly what has always been the case over the last 2 years and will continue to be the case, and I can wholeheartedly give him that assurance.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor will be pleased that his campaign team are behind him today. Does he really think that the super profits of $20 billion made by Shell are untouchable? His hands-off approach won't persuade many people across our country.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think what millions of people across this country will see today is a government that is on their side. Yeah. It is a government that is taking action to help them with the anxiety they feel about rising energy bills. It is doing it in a proportionate, fair and targeted way, and it is doing it in a responsible way to protect them, not just today, but for years into the future as well.
Robert Buckland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thousands of families in Swindon and millions of households across the country will welcome the immediate help on council tax that he has announced today in his very welcome statement. Does he agree with me that the COD analysis that we heard from the Right Honourable Lady opposite about the energy market in Europe is really demonstrable evidence of the paucity of the party opposite's approach to energy? And isn't our approach to a zero-carbon economy, but based upon energy security, going to be the way that we deliver our country out of these short-term problems?
Well, my right honourable friend makes, as ever, an excellent point. He's absolutely right. I agree wholeheartedly with him, and he will know my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, is working very hard to undo some of the mistakes that the party opposite made in the past.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I know the Chancellor's all pumped up, but this is pretty puny stuff, to be honest. £350 isn't going to touch the sides of the problem for my constituents in the Rhondda. Gas and electricity up for the average family in my constituency by £686. Fuel up by £314. The average weekly shop up by £385. Universal credit cut by £1,040. National insurance up by £150. And frozen tax allowances by him will cost another £300. That's £2,875 in a constituency where the average wage is £27,000. That is really going to cause hardship. Yep. £350 doesn't even touch it.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the party opposite have proposals which would give considerably less to many people. So it's a bit rich to hear that. But he had a long list of numbers, Mr Deputy Speaker. I also have a long list of numbers. 400,000 more people on payroll than there were before the crisis. 2 million jobs saved because of the actions of this government. The national living wage going up by £1,000 a year in April, and a £1,000 tax cut for millions of people on universal credit. Those are what we are doing, Mr Speaker, to put more money into people's pockets when they need it, and they can rely on us to continue supporting them, not just now, but for days and years into the future.
Well, welcome. Good afternoon. We'll leave the Commons for a second there. You join me live in Stoke-on-Trent, where millions of people here and right across the country have just been told their energy bills are set to rise significantly. We'll bring you more on that in just a moment. But let's bring you some breaking news now. The Bank of England has just announced the latest decision to raise interest rates. That's from 0.25 to 0.5%. Let's go straight to the Bank of England and speak to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway. Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. I mean, this is a big moment for the UK economy because as well as having energy prices increasing, we've had that confirmation from Ofgem, as well as having some intervention from the government to try and deal with that. We also have news that the Bank of England, well, two things really. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.25% to 0.5%. It could have been more. 4 members of the Monetary Policy Committee were arguing for a half-point increase, so they would have gone up to 0.75%, just to give you a sense that they really are concerned about the rise in inflation. They forecast that inflation is going to go above 7% this spring. It's the highest level since 1991. But here is the most striking thing, really. When you look within their latest forecast, because they've just released their latest forecast for the state of the economy, when you look at all of these things put together, so the rise in energy prices, when you look at the rise in taxes, the tax burden very high at the moment, when you look at how weak earnings are compared with inflation, you're seeing the biggest fall in disposable incomes. So you're talking about post-tax labour income. That's the name of the series. The biggest fall in that series that we've ever seen. As far back as the records go, they go to 1990. They are falling, those labour income, disposable incomes, they are falling by 2% this year, according to the bank's forecast. We've never seen anything like that. And it just underlines what a cost of living crisis we're facing at the moment. The bank talking about that, talking about inflation, but saying that the risk of higher inflation is so great that even though this is going to cause more pain for families, particularly those on floating rate mortgages, not many people, but nonetheless some people, they are deciding nonetheless to raise interest rates. So a very big moment for the UK economy, given that just what they're seeing out there, the state of the economy too. And I should say, I mean, normally in any other day this would be a big story, but they've also cut their growth forecast by a significant amount as well. So put it all together and it really is a striking moment. It really feels like the moment that the cost of living crisis has become a living reality for many people, for millions of people around the country, and the Bank of England underlining that we really haven't seen anything like this for a long time.
Ed, for the moment, thank you. As you say, quite a few financial stories bidding for the headlines today. Very busy day, but let's take you straight back to the House of Commons, where Rishi Sunak is still speaking.
And make sure the government continues to cut the cost of living for hard-working families.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his support, and he rightly champions those people who are just about managing, who are working incredibly hard to build a better life for them and their families, and they should know that this government is on their side. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for his support, because we will continue to champion them.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. These plans are playing Russian roulette with taxpayers' money, gambling that prices will go down, rather than providing a real solution to help families avoid skyrocketing bills. It's just delaying the pain while increasing taxes by £600 a year for the average household. So why won't he listen to our suggestion for a package that would actually help families reduce their bills by £1,000 a year? Surely it's time to admit he's got it wrong. It's time to scrap the Conservative tax hikes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we haven't heard from the party is any plan to provide the funding that the NHS needs. Right? We all know that the NHS is grappling with recovering from COVID. There's an unprecedented scale of backlogs to work through, and social care system that needs urgent reform. The only way to grapple with those challenges is to provide the NHS and social care with a sustainable source of funding. That's what we are doing. It is the responsible and right approach. It is a progressive approach, and it will benefit people in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well as England. And in the long run, it will be the right thing for this country.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend for the comprehensive package of support that he's provided, both fiscally responsible in the face of the energy volatility globally. My constituents will have the benefit and the reassurance of the rebate that he's announced on energy bills, but they won't have the reassurance of the council tax support that he's making available in England. Will he therefore at least encourage the Welsh Government to follow suit so my constituents have the same benefits as in England, or even take it a step further and insist that the benefit is passed on?
I thank my honourable friend. I can confirm that the Welsh administration will receive £175 million or so in Barnett consequentials, which will enable them to provide the similar discount. And my honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, will be speaking to the Welsh Government later today, and he will very much make the point that we would like to see that to the benefit of all of his constituents and those across Wales.
Like that.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In terms of the council tax rebate, there are some of the poorest families who don't pay a significant amount of council tax because they're on council tax support schemes. Will they still get, even if their council tax bills are less than £150 a year, the full £150? Will that therefore be paid in cash to them by the local authority in April? And in terms of the £150 million discretionary fund, will it be truly discretionary for councils to decide how they spend it, or are the government going to direct how it's spent?
Mr Deputy Speaker, of course the honourable gentleman is well informed on these issues. Our intention is that those people do benefit from the £150, and that's why we are providing the discretionary fund. It's been sized with a sense of who those people are and how many they are. We will, of course, provide some guidance to local authorities about who we would expect the support to go to, but ultimately they will be able to make those decisions for themselves.
John Penrose.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for an extremely welcome package, and it's the latest step, I think, in a series of very strong reactions to different crises throughout the pandemic and now today. He also mentioned improving the investment in North Sea gas fields, which is very welcome. But it is only a temporary set of issues. It's only a temporary set of solutions which will dull the initial economic pain without solving the long-term problem of sky-high energy prices. What conversations has he therefore had with his colleague sitting next to him, the Energy Secretary, about solutions to deal with those longer-term problems? And when can we expect to hear answers to those things to do with reforming the price cap, reforming the wholesale energy market and the like?
Yeah, well, my honourable friend is very thoughtful on these matters, and he's long made this point, and he's right to make this point, that we must also make sure that the long-term energy market is working in all our benefit. I can tell him that both the Energy Secretary, myself and the Prime Minister have been involved in these conversations for quite some time. The Energy Secretary is working on a set of measures which will address, I think, many of his concerns, and he should expect to hear from the government soon.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I just say how nice it is to see the Chancellor finally in his place? I know some of us have been considering filing a missing persons report, but given his absence in the recent weeks. And whilst I appreciate his update for families across Pontypridd and Taffy, it's just another case of too little too late. The Welsh Labour Government have doubled the Warm Home Discount Scheme, and Labour's proposal would have taken £600 off the bills for the poorest in our country. The Chancellor's plan gives them £350 off. Why has this fallen so far short of what is needed and what is proposed?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry that she didn't welcome the £175 million in Barnett consequentials for the Welsh administration, but also this government is providing support, significant support to those on middle incomes, because they are also struggling, Mr Speaker, and we believe that is the right approach.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome very much the Chancellor's recognition, as my honourable friend was saying, of the importance of a long-term energy policy. And also thank you very much indeed for his help for council taxpayers. The ATD ban will cover most folks on the island. Can he just confirm to me that he's talking about people with primary residences, both on the island but also nationally? Thank you.
Councillor.
Yes, my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I can confirm that that £150 is not for those with either second homes or empty homes, and we will make that crystal clear in how the policy is executed.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I thank the Chancellor for his contribution. It's not to be churlish, there's a bit of money that's been set aside, we appreciate that. But with this further right of energy, along with the uplifted cost of living in general, we are looking at working families and choosing what to cut out of their lives to make ends meet. Whilst I very much welcome the news and put it on record, the £150 million for Northern Ireland and also the other Barnett consequentials that will come along as well, could I ask the Chancellor this question? Would he consider and commit to reviewing the child benefit threshold for families whose wages are the same, and yet it simply isn't worth the same in real money terms as it did when the threshold was introduced in 2013? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and I'm glad that he recognises there are two sets of Barnett consequentials for Northern Ireland stemming from each of the two policies, which sum total £250 million. He will appreciate I can't comment on future tax and welfare policy, but as always I will take what he says and reflect on it.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I warmly welcome the Chancellor's statement because of 94% of properties in Stoke-on-Trent are council tax band A to C. So therefore, this £150 rebate is going to do wonders across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torp. But on his recent visit to the city of Stoke-on-Trent, he knows that the ceramics sector is an energy-intensive industry and is going to be looking for some more creative solutions in the short term to help them with rising energy costs. Can he confirm that he will meet with me and the other Stoke-on-Trent MPs to discuss these ideas further?
Chancellor.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm always happy to meet with my honourable friends from Stoke, which benefited from not just one, not just two, but three successful levelling up fund bids, which I was pleased to visit recently. He's right, and he's a proper champion for the ceramic sector in this House. Rightly, I enjoyed meeting representatives from that sector on my recent visit. I'll be happy to meet with him and them to discuss the situation further.
Barry Shearman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, we all know that the Chancellor is a fast-talking, slick operator who knows how to keep his head down when it's useful. Indeed. But can I tell him that someone who's been in this House since 1979, he's the most incompetent Chancellor I've ever seen. And when children go to bed, he doesn't like it, Mr Speaker. When children in my constituency go to bed with no food in their tummies, with no heat in their homes, what does he really think is the honourable position of a Chancellor who has just allowed one of his policies directly to be taken in fraud, £4.3 billion of fraud under his watch? Any other Chancellor that I've known would have come to the House today to resign.
Mr Speaker, I'll let this government's record on economic policy speak for itself. It's a record I'm proud of. But I can provide the honourable gentleman with the assurance that I and the government remain committed to tackling fraud wherever we see it. He mentions a figure in £4.9 billion. As I mentioned to the House in orals on Tuesday, that estimate has already been reduced, Mr Speaker, by a third, by £1.6 billion because of the actions we are taking. I won't go into them all now, but he should know that we will go after everyone wherever we can to recover that money for the taxpayer, and I'm confident that we will do a very good job.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. This is a targeted package that helps us just about managing, which is entirely right. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, under the last Labour government, the party opposite closed 6 nuclear power stations and had a policy of no new nuclear. Does he agree with me that alongside these measures to help people in the short term, it's imperative that we invest in our long-term energy security, in domestic gas production, in renewables and, crucially, in new nuclear?
My honourable friend is absolutely right about some of the failures of policy that the party opposite propagated in power. That is being fixed, my honourable friend, the Energy Secretary. We are not just investing in new nuclear, as he said, with billions of pounds at the spending review, but also in offshore wind and, as he knows in his part of the world, carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, where Teesside is playing a starring role in that green energy revolution.
Ben Legg.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor will be aware that nearly 20% of households in Wales are not connected to the mains gas grid. In rural areas like Ceredigion, that figure actually rises to over 80%. And research by the Office for National Statistics notes that Ceredigion suffered the highest increase in fuel bills of any area.
OK, we're leaving the Commons. We're going straight to Piccadilly in London. The BAFTA nominations are being announced. Eju Oduru and Tom Allen there. They're announcing the Best Director nomination. So let's have a listen.
Belfast. Don't Look Up. June. Licorice Pizza. The Power of the Dog. And finally, these are the 6 most nominated films this year. I mean...
Wow. Amazing.
June will be very happy.
June have done amazingly well. Yeah. I love their shoes. Congratulations to all of our brilliant nominees. They are absolutely amazing, very really inspiring.
Are. Congratulations. What a great bunch this year, genuinely.
Really, really brilliant.
Now, please tune in on Sunday, the 13th of March, to watch all the action from the EE BAFTA Film Awards, hosted by Rebel Wilson.
Oh,
it's going to be a hoot.
Oh, I can't wait. The ceremony will be broadcast on BBC One in the UK and throughout the world.
With live coverage of the red carpet on BAFTA's social media channels, hosted by myself, Eji Adudu, and himself, Tom Allen. Yes, that's right. Us again.
Yeah.
You can't get enough of a good thing, am I right?
You are so right. We are very Moorish, aren't we?
Delicious indeed.
Like lovely crisps.
Pass me a few bags. You can use the hashtag EEBAFTAs to start your chin wagging now.
Oh, I love a chin wag.
Me too.
I've got so many of them. Let's go to that buffet.
Let's do it.
Thank you very much.
Watching.
Bye.
OK, so there you had it, the nominations for the BAFTAs. They just announced, that was Eji Ojuju and Tom Allen, of course. They just announced the nomination for Best Film. Hang on a second, let me get it up. So, nomination for Best Film. Of course, as soon as I had it here, and then as soon as you come back, it's not up. OK, I'm just going to tell you a bit more about it. They're taking place on March the 22nd. Rebel Wilson is going to be hosting it, of course. Last year, it wasn't in person. This year, it is going to be in person. So they're really trying to get people back in. Best Film nominees, Belfast. Have you seen that? It's meant to be brilliant. Don't Look Up. I have seen that. That is brilliant. June, Licorice Pizza, and The Power of the Dog. OK, right, let's go to our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer. She knows a bit more about this than I do. Katie, take us through the... Just a bit more. Take us through the nominations, Katie.
Well, I have to say, that was a bit of an upset. There's certainly some notable names that are missing from that list, and certainly some exciting additions as well. Shall we take you... I think you only came in at the end, so shall we take a look back through some of the awards that were mentioned? The most unexpected thing we have to talk about, Dune, obviously this big sci-fi blockbuster leading the way with 11 nominations. So for Best Picture, certainly there were 3 names that we expected that have made the list this year. Power of the Dog, Benedict Cumberbatch's toxic masculinity film, that's made the list. Licorice Pizza, everyone has been raving about critically as well. That made the list. Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's semi-autobiographical take on his childhood, also on the list. But the upsets on here that we weren't expecting. Dune, obviously, 11 nominations up for Best Picture. I think if people were thinking a blockbuster was going to be on the list, we were expecting it to be James Bond, No Time to Die. But yeah, so that's made Best Picture. Don't Look Up as well. That's Adam McKay's satire on the climate crisis. Again, critically, people have loved these, but I think perhaps it is quite unexpected that it's made the Best Picture list. For Best Director, 3 of the women on this list, it's split 3-3, 3 men, 3 women, which is extraordinary. Normally in other years we sort of make a big thing of the fact that there's hardly any women that ever seem to qualify. 3 of the women on this list have made it for Best Director. Happening, Audrey Diwan, The Power of the Dog, Jane Campion, Titan, Julia Ducournau. I mean, that's the inclusion of that is quite amusing. It's about a woman who has a fetish for cars. I think really of that category, Jane Campion, the filmmaker who's been around for decades now, we're expecting her to be certainly one of the front runners for that. If we take you through leading actress, I mean, the big snub there. Everyone, I think, was expecting Kristen Stewart for playing Princess Diana in Spencer to be nominated. Nothing for her on this. Lady Gaga, who of course got a lot of stick for her Italian accent in House of Gucci, she's made the cut here, as has Alana Haim for Licorice Pizza. Obviously, she's from a music background. This is her first go at acting in films. Extraordinary performance she gives in that. I think people will be very excited to see that Coda's Amelia Jones makes the list for this. It's a brilliant indie film that was bought for millions at the Sundance Film Festival about the child of a deaf family who... It's a coming-of-age tale, but it's a great film, but perhaps an unexpected name, really, to make it on that list. Leading actor... We were talking a bit earlier today about the fact that we were all expecting Denzel Washington to be named on there for Macbeth. Sadly, I mean, he hasn't ever been nominated for a BAFTA. He hasn't this year been nominated for a BAFTA either. So he's one of the notable exceptions, really, on this leading actor list. Will Smith, though, who also hasn't been nominated for a BAFTA before, he has made the list for King Richard, playing the father of Venus and Serena Williams in that role. Benedict Cumberbatch, I think, I mean, it's a good year for British names as well. Benedict Cumberbatch as a Brit, obviously. Adil Akhtar, and you've got Stephen Graham on there as well. I mean, Adil Akhtar... It's brilliant. He won a few weeks ago at the Independent Film Awards. I think people after that were noticing the film and talking about it a lot more. But it is, nevertheless, very unexpected that he's made it in the leading actor category. You would think perhaps his addition in this list means that Denzel probably got elbowed out the way. But it is a great film, Ali and Ava. And if we just take you through the tallies of who won what, Dune comes away with the most nominations of 11. Power of the Dog has scored 8 nominations, and Belfast only 6. I think we were expecting certainly that Sir Kenneth Branagh would be nominated for Best Director. He, in fact, has only been nominated for Screenplay this year. But what a shocker of Dune. It's this big epic sci-fi, big budget, one of the biggest openings that Warner Brother had last year. And I just think that might say something of really the world we were in last year post-pandemic. People were very excited to watch that film. Did tremendously enormously well at the box office, and certainly this year at the BAFTAs, we feel that that's reflected really. These big blockbusters are nominated, and we're seeing that reflected in the nominations.
OK, Katie, thank you so much. I don't know if I'm more upset about Jamie Dornan not getting a nomination or Denzel, but yeah, thanks a lot, Katie.
Hello there, welcome back to Stoke-on-Trent. I've relocated inside to the Unicorn Inn. It is a pub, but I'm not here to drink. I'm here to speak to Tracy Bowen. Not a happy subject, although this is a place where many people come to drown their sorrows. Tell us the implications of the price hike today in terms of energy prices going up to 1,900 plus a year.
Yeah, well, it's quite worrying, really, isn't it? I mean, just before Christmas, my energy provider went and ceased trading, so we had to go with somebody else, which hiked it quite a bit over Christmas anyway. It's worrying. I mean, hospitality's been hit hard, and you know we're just starting to recover a bit, and then we've got these added costs. With this pub, we have to have the heating on to keep the customers warm, but we've also got to make sure we've got doors open for ventilation. What with COVID still being prevalent around the area and stuff, so it's just customer confidence and keeping them warm as well.
Yeah, so how does it operate now? Because you've got to increase ventilation, haven't you?
Yeah, once I start getting quite a few customers in, it starts getting a bit uncomfortable in here because it's so small, so we have to open the back door, keeps the ventilation going, but of course we've still got to keep the heating on to keep them warm, so it's basically you're throwing money down the drain really, but it's just something that you've got to do, you know, at the moment with these colder months.
And for you personally, what does it mean at home? Because it's a huge hike, isn't it?
Yeah, it's difficult. My apartment's all electric, so, you know, storage heaters are known to be expensive anyway. I've just gone to putting blankets and things, you know, instead of putting the heating on all the time.
When people come into the pub, as I said at the start, often to drown their sorrow, sometimes to celebrate, it's for a good reason. Yeah. What's the conversation been like? How has it changed over, you know, what people talk about when they come in here?
Yeah, well, the conversation's obviously changed from COVID now. Now more people are coming back out, and they are concerned about the energy prices. You know, the wages in Stoke-on-Trent as well are quite low. You know, obviously we've got the minimum wage, but it's not much above them. So, yeah, they're concerned. Yeah.
In terms of the area, we know that about 25,000 are in the poverty trap or considered poverty fuel trap. Yeah. Overall, how is that going to affect the area?
I think it's going to hit it hard. I think fewer people are going to come out. You know, we've got a theatre locally, and you know people travel to it. But I think people that live locally, you know, aren't going to be coming out and doing things. You know, and hopefully, you know, people will still come to the pub and, you know, socialise, because that's a major thing. They can keep warm here, so... Yes,
that's a good plus. Tracy, thanks very much for speaking to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to take you now to a Bank of England press conference, news conference. Let's listen into that.
As this monetary policy report went to press, sterling oil prices were almost 90% above their levels at the end of 2020. UK wholesale gas prices were almost 400% higher. Wholesale electricity prices had risen by more than 300%. The UK is a net importer of energy and tradable goods, and the rise in global prices will inevitably both put upward pressure on inflation and weigh on UK real income and spending. Beyond the near term, and conditioned on a market-implied path for bank rates that rises to around 1.5% by the middle of next year, UK GDP growth is expected to slow to subdued rates. A small margin of spare capacity is likely to emerge later this year, and then to build over the forecast period. In the labour market, unemployment has continued to fall, despite the closure of the furlough scheme. According to the Labour Force survey, the unemployment rate reached 4.1% in the 3 months to November. Demand for workers remains robust, with job churn elevated and the number of vacancies at a record high. Unemployment is projected to fall a little further over the coming months before rising again, owing to the impact of higher global energy and tradable goods prices on domestic demand. Reflecting the tight labour market, pay growth is somewhat above pre-pandemic rates at around 4%. And respondents to the bank's agents' annual pay survey expect pay settlements to increase this year. In the Monetary Policy Committee's central projection, underlying pay growth is expected to rise to around 4.75% over the coming year, before falling to around 2.5% over the medium term as labour market conditions ease. Turning to inflation, UK consumer price inflation rose to 5.4% in December, well above its 2% target, and almost 1 percentage point higher than expected at the time of the November monetary policy report. Most of the overshoot in inflation relative to the target continues to reflect the more general rise in the price of globally traded goods. Higher energy prices explain nearly 1 percentage point of the rise in inflation since September. But rising domestic cost pressures, driven by a tight labour market, have also added to the upward pressure on consumer prices, albeit to a lesser extent. Core inflation, which strips out energy and other volatile items, picked up to 4.2% in December. Inflation is expected to increase further in the coming months, peaking at around 7.25% in April, when higher utility price caps are due to be implemented. In the central projection, the upward pressure on CPI inflation dissipates over time. However, as global energy prices stop rising and global supply constraints stabilise, while domestic cost pressures ease with demand weakening, the widening degree of spare capacity adds further to the downward pressure on inflation in the second half of the forecast. Conditional on the market-implied path for bank rate, consumer price inflation is projected to fall to a little above the 2% target in 2 years' time and below the target by a greater margin in 3 years. In line with the usual convention, the committee's forecast is conditioned on announced government policy. Now, I should note that the committee's forecast was closed before Ofgem's announcement on the level of the energy price cap and the government's announcement of its policy response this morning. So the impact of these announcements is not included in the projection presented in the monetary policy report. It's unlikely that the policies will have a material impact on consumer price inflation beyond the second year of the forecast, though we obviously will need to discuss carefully with the ONS how these various announcements are going to be treated. Let me turn to the risks around the outlook. The degree of uncertainty around the outlook remains unusually high. Looking over the near term, upside risks to inflation are in full focus. In the Monetary Policy Committee's central projection, wage growth moderates as domestic demand weakens owing to the squeeze in real incomes from higher energy and tradable goods prices. Over the past few months, however, indicators of short-term inflation expectations have risen as inflation itself has picked up. The bank's agent survey captures a pickup in expected pay settlements driven by higher consumer price inflation in addition to labour market tightness. Some firms report to us that they have started passing on higher labour costs to consumer prices. If these effects prove stronger or more persistent than assumed in the central projection, inflation could rise further. The MPC will continue to monitor indicators of expectations and their impact very closely. But as inflation comes down over the medium term, downside risks come into sharper focus. The committee's forecast is conditioned on paths for oil, gas and electricity prices that follow their respective futures curves for the first 6 months, and beyond that, given the inherent unpredictability of these prices, remain constant. Given the shape of the futures curves, this assumption implies that, beyond that 6-month horizon, the assumed paths of wholesale energy prices remain a long way above the levels that markets expect currently. If energy prices were to fall back to the levels implied by futures curves, the degree of excess supply and unemployment would be around 0.5 percentage point lower by the end of the forecast period. CPI inflation would fall towards target more rapidly, and, conditional on the current market-implied path for bank rate, would be around 0.75 percentage point below the target in 2 and in 3 years' time. Let me turn now to the immediate monetary policy decision. The Monetary Policy Committee's remit is clear. that the inflation target applies at all times, reflecting the primacy of the monetary policy's price stability objective. The remit also recognises that there will be occasions when inflation departs from the target as a result of shocks and disturbances. In the recent unprecedented circumstances, the economy has been subject to very large and repeated shocks. The continued sharp rises in global energy and tradable goods prices will necessarily both put upward pressure on inflation and weigh on UK real aggregate income and spending. Monetary policy is unable to prevent this. The role of monetary policy is to ensure that, as the economy adapts to this shock to real incomes, it does so in a way that is consistent with consumer price inflation returning sustainably to the 2% target in the medium term, while minimising undesirable volatility in output. Given the current tightness of the labour market and continuing signs of greater persistence in domestic cost and price pressures, the committee judges that an increase in bank rate of 0.25 percentage points is warranted at this meeting. Consistent with the MPC's existing guidance from the August 2021 Monetary Policy Report, the committee agreed at this meeting that the Bank of England should cease to reinvest maturities falling due from its stock of UK government bond purchases. The committee further agreed that the Bank of England should start to unwind its stock of sterling non-financial investment-grade corporate bonds. Let me finish with some thoughts on the future. This is not a standard demand-driven rise in bank rate. The predominant cause of higher inflation is an extreme example of what economists describe as a terms of trade shock. Import prices, in particular those of energy and traded goods, have risen very significantly. This raises the cost of living for all of us and reduces real national income. We have not raised interest rates today because the economy is roaring away. The economy is only now back to the size it was immediately before the pandemic a couple of years ago. An increase in bank rate is necessary because it is unlikely that inflation will return to target without it. We face the risk that some of the higher imported inflation could become ingrained within the domestic economy, leading to a longer period of high inflation. Given the uncertainties, however, it should be no surprise that the exact size of the response was a close call in the deliberations of the Monetary Policy Committee. But we should also keep things in perspective. Today, we have increased bank rate by 25 basis points to 0.5%. That is a change that will be felt by households and businesses around the country. But rates nevertheless remain very low by historical standards. The extent of any further tightening of monetary policy will depend on the medium-term prospects for inflation. The MPC judges that, if the economy develops broadly in line with the February report's central projection, some further modest tightening of monetary policy is likely to be appropriate in the coming months. But it would be a mistake to extrapolate simplistically from what we have done today and assume that rates are now on an inevitable long march upwards. The pace and extent of any further monetary tightening will, as always, depend on how the economy evolves and on a number of developments which are highly uncertain. We face a trade-off between strong inflation and weakening growth. For example, domestic wage and cost pressures could continue to build, and the increase in import costs may not ease off as expected. Conversely, as illustrated in an alternative scenario in the report, developments in wholesale gas prices could cause inflation to fall below target in 2 and 3 years' time. There is therefore much uncertainty. The MPC will, it scarcely needs to be said by me, remain very vigilant. So with that, Ben, Dave and I will be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Andrew. And with that to the questions, usual drill really, please wait for the microphones to get to you. When you're called on, please state your name and the organisation you work for, and we will get to as many as possible. First, Faisal, then Ed.
Faisal, BBC. Thanks, Governor. Are you saying that you can start to see the beginnings of a wage price spiral? And how do you communicate that to UK households? Given the sort of sort of not unique nature, but the special nature of the situation that we're in, the terms of trade shock that you talked about, to communicate to households that because their energy bills have pushed up inflation, their mortgage bills might also go up. That's a tricky one. Why don't you have a go at explaining that?
It is tricky, Faisal. Let me say that I'm most decidedly not going to use the phrase wage price spiral. We're not in the territory of that phrase, in my view. What we are seeing, and you may have observed, I referred a number of times to the survey that our regional agents have done, actually very contemporaneously. They finished it literally only a week or two ago. Is that we are seeing upward movement in what firms expect to be wage settlements. After adjusting for all the sort of the various COVID-related effects on the data, I think the underlying rate of wage growth is somewhat higher than we would expect it to be at this point in the cycle. That's something we've observed before. But coming on to the main thrust of your question, I mean, you're correct that, of course, this is a difficult situation. We all hope coming out of the COVID period. There is good news in that the economy has broadly recovered its pre-COVID level of output. I think another very good piece of news is that, let's put our hand up. I think all of us, thought unemployment would be higher than it actually has been and is, and that is very good news. But I'll finish by saying, and this is the hard message, I know, that we are facing a squeeze.
So Andrew Bailey there, the Governor of the Bank of England, just talking us through that earlier announcement that the bank is raising the interest rate from 0.25% to 0.5%. A lot about the economy today, a lot to break down and a lot to take in, really. We'll be doing that throughout the day here on Sky News. But for now, let's go back to Piccadilly, where those BAFTA nominations were just announced in the last half hour. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, is there for us. Katie.
Thank you. I feel like we couldn't be more different, could we? Off the Bank of England, you come to us over at Piccadilly. BAFTAs, though, what an upset. I feel like if there was an apple cart that was going to be upset, I'm gabbling away and not making much sense. I'm joined by the red carpet host of BAFTA, Tom Allen and AJ Adudu. Hello. It was exciting, though, wasn't it, the nominations? June, we weren't expecting June, were we?
Phenomenal. I mean, it's just incredible. And like you said, very exciting indeed, because we weren't even allowed to know until we got handed that card. Yeah. We have no idea.
Absolutely. I think there's some surprises in there. I think some will be surprised by some of the people who are included who haven't been mentioned already, have been quite quiet on those kind of articles where people are like, it's going to be this person, it's going to be that film. There's some real surprises, and I think it really celebrates, well, in films around the world, but particularly the great swell of British talent. I'm so excited for that.
Have you divvied up who's getting who on the red carpet? Lady Gaga, I mean.
Do you know what? We've not talked about that. However, I will fight you, Tom, for Lady Gaga and Leonardo DiCaprio.
Imagine how undignified that's going to be if we're all like shuffling. No, I've got a question. Actually, well, I just want to say I really like what you're wearing. Thank you. We really wanted to just bring a sense of, well, a bit of silliness, a bit of chaos to proceedings, which we hope brings people in across the threshold of the ceremony, so we can have a bit of a laugh with everybody. That's what we wanted to do.
It's going to be fun. So I hope to see everyone there on the